Nikola Tesla and Guglielmo Marconi are both famous for their pioneering work in electrical engineering and radio. It's less well known that both were also interested in trying to communicate with extraterrestrial civilizations. Speculation about the possible existence of intelligent life on the Moon and nearby planets goes back a long way, and during the 19th century various schemes were proposed for signalling to any inhabitants there might be on our neighbouring worlds. In 1821, the great German mathematician and physicist Carl Gauss invented the heliotrope, which uses a mirror to reflect sunlight over long distances and was subsequently used in survey work. The following year, in 1822, in a letter to the astronomer Heinrich Olbers, Gauss wrote, "With 100 separate mirrors, each of 16 square feet, one would be able to send good heliotrope light to the Moon. This would be a discovery even greater than that of America if we could get in touch with our neighbours on the Moon." The idea of using mirrors to send signals across space was taken up later by the French writer and inventor Charles Cros. He designed an automatic telegraph and displayed it at the World Fair of 1867. He also designed a device called a palliaphone, a kind of gramophone, before Thomas Edison's more famous version. In 1869, Cros proposed a method of sending signals to either Mars or Venus. It involved focusing the rays from one or more electric lights by parabolic mirrors. Periodic flashing of light from the mirrors would, he suggested, send the equivalent of a Morse code message. If the signals received a response, he said, it will be a moment of joy and pride. The eternal isolation of the spheres is vanquished. In the 1890s, at the height of the Martian Canal controversy, and by the way, you can learn more about this in another of my videos, interest was focused on communicating with advanced Martians. This interest was intensified by the announcement of the Guzman Prize, a prize of 100,000 francs, announced by the French astronomer Camille Flammarion in 1891, to the person of whatever nation who will find the means within the next 10 years of communicating with a star, planet or otherwise, and of receiving a response. It was bequeathed by a French widow, Clara Guzman, an admirer of Flammarion's writings, in honour of her son Pierre. The 1890s also saw the first experiment in long-distance radio communication, so, not surprisingly, by the dawn of the 20th century, suggestions were being made that perhaps radio waves were the best way of getting in touch with our interplanetary neighbours, if any existed. Nikola Tesla was a brilliant but enigmatic Croatian-born American electrical engineer and inventor. In 1885, having emigrated to the US, he joined Edison's company at Menlo Park, California, but later left for New York to work on his own. Tesla's discovery of the rotating magnetic field permitted his construction of the first alternating current, or AC, induction motor in about 1888. Since it's easier to transmit AC than direct current, DC, over long distances, this invention was of great importance. He developed arc lighting and the Tesla coil, a device for producing high-frequency currents. Tesla was also the first to attempt to communicate with extraterrestrials using radio waves. In the February 9, 1901 issue of Collier's Weekly, he published an article called "Talking with the Planets," in which he claimed he'd detected an artificial signal from Mars or possibly Venus using high-voltage equipment he'd set up at Colorado Springs. He predicted that interplanetary communication would become the dominating idea of the century that has just begun. He went on, "With an expenditure not exceeding 2,000 horsepower, signals can be transmitted to a planet such as Mars with as much exactness and certitude as we now send messages by wire from New York to Philadelphia." The local newspaper expressed its delight at Tesla's breakthrough. If there be people on Mars, they certainly showed most excellent taste in choosing Colorado Springs as the particular point with which to open communication. However, the scientific community responded more skeptically. Former director of the Lick Observatory, Edward Holden, commented, "It is a rule of sound philosophizing to examine all probable causes for an unexplained phenomenon before invoking improbable ones. Every experimenter will say that it is almost certain that Mr. Tesla has made an error." 2 decades later, though, the idea of interplanetary communication was revived by Marconi. For several years, Marconi was involved with the possibility of radio communication with extraterrestrial intelligence. His first public comments on the subject appeared on the front page of the New York Times on January the 20th, 1919, under the headline, "Radio to Stars, Marconi's Hope." Marconi expressed his belief that there may be many inhabited worlds, that mathematics might serve as a common language of communication, and that unexplained signals he detected might have been sent by intelligent beings in space. A year later, the Daily Mail in London reported that Marconi had found very queer sounds and indications which might come from somewhere outside the Earth, including Morse code. Subsequently, the New York Times followed up the story, stimulating comments from a number of scientists and engineers around the world. Although Marconi said nothing more on the subject, the possibility of radio communication with extraterrestrials created a lot of public excitement at the coming close opposition or nearest approach of Mars in 1924. By this time, most professional astronomers agreed that there was little chance of finding advanced Martians. But one who hadn't yet given up hope of making contact with the inhabitants of the Red Planet was David Todd. Todd was an American astronomer and director of the observatory at Amherst College. In 1907, he'd led the expedition organized by Percival Lowell to Chile to photograph the supposed Martian canals. 2 years later, he suggested that the Martians might use radio waves to communicate with Earth, and that sensitive receivers carried to high altitude by balloon would have the best chance of picking up these signals. Although Todd revived his plan in 1920, around the time Marconi was discussing extraterrestrial signals, no balloon was ever launched. In August 1924, during an opposition of Mars, Todd persuaded the United States Army and Navy to use their receiving stations to listen in for any unusual signals. In 1960, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence was revived, but this time the target was not the nearby worlds of the solar system, but the planets of other stars. That search continues to this day.